So I am Patrick. I am from LightOn. LightOn is an AI company, a French AI company. We have started in photonic hardware to train AI models, and then we shifted to build a generative model up to 180B parameters, and now we are trying to build industrial application to facilitate the use of this technology in industrial application. And so we are very much involved in key European projects. So I will, of course, talk about those projects. Feel free to interrupt me with any kind of questions, because, of course, there will be a Q&A session at the end. But whenever you wish to interrupt me, feel free to do so. There is no problem about it. And I'd like also to thank Philippe, the previous speaker, because he gave a perfect introduction to my speech. So we have plenty of European projects. Why so? Because, of course, artificial intelligence, and especially also generative artificial intelligence, is a key component of company competitiveness, but it raises a lot of issues with science, ethics, and economics. And all those projects are speaking about this type of issue. How do you reconcile science, economics, and ethics? And so I will talk about 3 European projects that are, that have been designed especially to solve this kind of issue. Because you probably understand that the philosophy in Europe is to make this technology compatible with ethical, guidance, and of course, competing with the Chinese and the American powerhouses is a big issue. There is a lot of, talking about. Okay, Europe is focusing on regulation, while US and China are focusing on performance. So those 3 European projects try to solve this dilemma, and we'll see if how we can be successful in trying to be compliant with these values. So a few words about LightOn. So LightOn, we are a research company first. We did some research in photonic computer. This is a key because, as you probably know, AI and generative AI is not sustainable. Meaning, when you use OpenAI API, you pay for half of the cost of what is delivered. Meaning, the cost of the compute, the cost of electricity, is a big issue, and it's kind of burning the planet at this time. So at this time, the big companies don't, they don't give you the proper pricing. It's heavily subsidized because the cost of those software is higher than the price you pay for it. So we did research in photonic hardware, because photonic, of course, is one of the solutions to have a sustainable computing. But it's at this time, there are still a lot of research about this technology, but it raises the issue of sustainability, since this technology is heavily burning energy to work properly. So we developed the models from 1 billion to 180 billion parameters. At the moment, we are world-class in one type of model, which is the OCR model, optical character recognition, working with this technology. And of course, we have a platform which is called Paradigm that tries to, let's say, encapsulate this technology for easy use for industries. And we have a lot of customers, both private and public, So that's about LightOn. So the first European project I will tell you about is OpenEuroLLM. So OpenEuroLLM, the goal is to develop a fully aligned model on what you know is the AI Act. The AI Act being a set of regulation ensuring that this technology complies with the ethical values of the European community. And so it's a big challenge because if you want to be compliant with those regulations, of course, you don't get access to all type of data. And the data, of course, is the gold mine of this technology because you need to be compliant with those rules. So you need to be compliant with IPs and author rights. And so the goal is to develop models, a set of models that are, let's say, respectful of the European languages, not only in terms of vocabulary or syntax, but also in terms of culture. For instance, you probably know that when you ask a culture-oriented question to an OpenAI model, the answer becomes biased. For instance, we have a cheese in France, which is called the camembert. And if you ask the model whether you should eat camembert, the model will say, no, it's poisonous, because there are bacteria, you know. And so this is important because those models encapsulate the human knowledge. And if you encapsulate human knowledge, but you encapsulate with bias, then there is a problem, because at the end of the day, with this technology, probably human knowledge will be capitalized within those big models. And if human knowledge is capitalized with bias, then it's not really sustainable at the end. And so we try to build such model so compliant with the AI Act and respectful of culture, meaning try to avoid, try to ensure that when you use this model, this model will be respectful of the different European cultures and not only respectful about grammar or vocabulary. Of course, this is a challenge because all the data sets that we are going to use in this, we are using in this project are compliant with the AI Act, which means that we don't get access to that many volume of data set, but we compensate because within the training data, we make sure that the balance between high resource languages and low resource languages make sure that whatever the European language you are using, it's not, you avoid the cultural bias. So for the OpenEuroLLM, you have plenty of partners in the consortium. Those are, let's say, some examples. The project is led by Charles University of Prague. And so you have plenty of nationalities. It's part of the Digital Europe programs in Europe. And you have also another project which is highly connected to this one, which is LLM for Use. I will speak about it later. And so OpenEuroLLM has been, let's say, funded to deliver a model, a generative model, able to take into account the European languages and the European culture. And LLM for Use is a project that is going to use OpenEuroLLM models to deliver application for industries. So the two projects are complementary because LLM for Use is more applicative and OpenEuroLLM is more, let's say, technically oriented. So the model, the application. And all those two projects are coordinated by the ALTEDIC organization, which is the Alliance for the Language Technology. And so within this ecosystem of your project, I will also talk about the Deploy AI project, where we also partner, which is oriented towards providing a set of assets, a set of tools to the public sector and to the small and medium enterprise, so that the European ecosystem is no longer dependent on foreign technology, but on European and compliant technology. So feel free to interrupt if you have any question again. And so, of course, this type of project and OpenEuroLLM, of course, is based on open source community members. So, of course, the philosophy is to enrich the open source community. You know that the big powerhouses, deliver or develop private models, and of course they all have an open source version of those models. But open source, is a tricky word because in this technology, open source, there are different levels of open source. You can publish the technical details, which are called the weights of the model. You can publish or not the type of data you have been using to train the models, and you can publish or not the algorithm you have been using to train the model. And so, as of now, we are heavily dependent. The open source community tries to, let's say, foster innovation, but we are still dependent on the release of bigger model that cost many millions because of the compute and because of the data generation and data annotation. So within this project, we have and we rely on 5 EuroHPC centers. So you probably know that across Europe you have what we call AI factories. They are supercomputers scattered across European countries. There is at least one supercomputer in the major countries. And so part of this program, we have 5 Euro supercomputers. They are about to be better connected with each other in a project which is called EuroHPC, the AI factories. And those type of supercomputers were originally meant for public research. And now the idea is to be able to, let's say, organize the better synergies across those HPC and provide services not only for academic research but also for the European industry. So the OpenEuroLLM is aiming for 36 to be efficient in 36 European languages. So it's the languages of the member of the European Committee plus the candidate countries, the current candidate countries. And so, of course, the big issues is that among those countries, we have countries with low resource languages. This technology is based on a lot of data for training, and of course, if you have a language which is not spoken by tons of people, you have low resource language, meaning the data for this language, the available data to train models are not easily available. This is one of the issues that we are trying to tackle to deliver this European OpenEuroLLM model. And of course, one of the key issues is evaluation, because of course, if we want to deliver European models that are respectful of European culture, we must also build up the evaluation set to make sure that the target is reached. And of course, the evaluation set will also be used to benchmark this model against other type of models, because of course at this time, big models also claim that they understand European language, but as I quoted before, they have cultural bias. So one of the intent of this project is also to deliver some benchmark to make sure that whenever a model says, I do speak Hungary very well, we have an evaluation set that establishes that not only the model is speaking the language, but the model is also respectful of the culture. This is a big challenge, by the way. So any question about this project, of course, you will be able to ask those questions at the end of my speech, but if you have already questions, don't hesitate. So, yeah?
Yeah, you are talking a lot about this, like in the European Union collaboration and so on, but what you are doing with like countries who are like maybe like you are not agree with like their values currently that they support. Yeah, like one more time, if like did you face some problems that some of the European countries maybe do not want to support this project because it's not aligned with their values, so they do not feel that it's like very important to be too ethical and we could just skip it? Or for example, do you have fear that some of the countries could use it to these tools to support those values you are like basically share? Because if this is a project with so many participants, I think that some tension could be how you are going out from this.
Yeah, that's a very good question because, of course, the European community is not, aligned on everything. All countries are not aligned on everything. So the challenge here is to leave the door open to every country to provide, because, of course, being aligned with the given culture comes first from the data. As Philippe previously said, if you provide the wrong type of data, the model is biased. And so we are heavily dependent on the data provided by the countries. So the Altedic organization is trying to, let's say, to synergize the collection of data across different countries to make sure that we start with data reflecting the values and the culture of a country. So in this process, it's not deterministic. You cannot say, okay, I will choose this very type of data for the model. It's an open process, and so it's not, the process is whatever the country, whoever is willing to participate to this data collection, feel free to provide. But we cannot prevent any type of, bias. But, the task of collecting data is so huge that it's very difficult, first, to have every country participating to this task. So, of course, this project will be, let's say, an ongoing project because the official timeline for this project is 3 years. But, of course, in 3 years, probably we will not achieve, the end result for the 42 languages or the 36 languages. We will demonstrate that this process will work according to those lines, and every country willing to enrich the data, enrich the model, will be free to provide the data through the Altedic organization so that those models progressively are more and more aligned with different cultures. So it's an open project, but of course everything relies on the will and the policies of each country to participate or not participate, to provide good data or not. And so basically, this is showing the way, but of course the way is not going to be finished over the time frame of the project. But yeah, definitely your question is valuable. It depends on the political will of the participating country, definitely. There was another remark, probably.
Yeah, I was just curious about these languages. So when you speak about these 36, what do they include? They must be only European, so more or less. How about then, let's say, if we can call them, the newcomers or the new communities, let's say Arabic-speaking communities and other diasporic communities. So are they represented in these models? What are the policies? How much openness?
Yeah, That's a very good question again, because officially, the targeted languages are the official languages of the member of the EU community, plus the candidate countries. But for instance, Arabic, though there are plenty of Arabic-speaking people across Europe, is not included so far in the project. But again, this is an ongoing project. You know, we are trying to open the game, but there are many challenges. One of it is to be able to release a good model while we are restricted in the volume of data that can be used, because we don't allow this model to be trained on data where author rights will not be respected or whatsoever. So we are very strict in applying the AI regulation. But the main challenge is that, of course, today big models compete because they can aggregate tons of data. But now what the industry needs is not big models. Now industry needs specialized models, which means that the dilemma of collecting tons and tons of data, this dilemma was originated by the competition across the big powerhouse to demonstrate that they are able to manufacture a very clever model, but those models are too heavy to be used in industry, because the heavier the model, the heavier the cost of using it. And so now the industry wants not very big model, but mid to small size models, but very efficient for a given purpose. And that's where, of course, these initiatives can be relevant, because, of course, here we are not competing with size. It's impossible, because the number of data for each European country will be low resource country. But we aim to understand to what extent we can build a model which can be, let's say, efficient and also compliant with some values that we bet are the winning values. Yeah.
Short question. So maybe I missed it, but so the goal of the project is, so the output would be one big model or many smaller models, or kind of per language, or what is the ambition there?
Yeah, good question also. It's a set of models. It's a family of models. So probably the target range will be, so currently we are releasing sub 10B models, so 9 to 10B models, just to test that the technology works with this restriction about the data, and that the technology works being respectful of low resource languages. The target will be 30 or even 70B models, not higher. And yes, the target will be to deliver a set of models that will be able to speak the 36 European language while respecting the culture. Okay, but of course, again, we are starting a process, and probably, we will understand what are the good training recipes to have those cross-lingual transfers. And when those recipes will be tested, understood, then it's going to be, it's going to be possible to extend the number of languages up to the 36, and probably, yeah.
And so it will be open weight models?
Yes, of course. Everything will be open.
And will they be usable also for translation? Or are they?
Yeah. Of course. One of the use case will be translation. Yeah. But in order to train those models, the paradox is that we are using translation model because for lower source languages, it's difficult to have a volume. So we are testing to what extent when we are testing the recipe, as a matter of fact. When you take native language data, you need to complement them with some type of synthetic data. What's a good recipe to have this balance between native and synthetic, and so that overall the model can be efficient in various type of language, and are able to transfer capabilities across languages from high resource to low resource. So if no other question, so the next project I will talk about is the AI on Demand platform, the AI on Demand project. A few data first. So it's 28 million. It's over 4 years. It's coordinated by a German company which is called Fraunhofer. And the goal is to deliver a technology platform to facilitate the adoption of AI technology across Europe, but of course to facilitate adoption while relying on European software and European assets. Because to date, you know, when using those technologies, the small companies, but even also the big companies, rely on de facto standards that are delivered by big US companies, for models also by Chinese companies. And so here, the aim of the project is to facilitate collaboration across the European countries to deliver, let's say, assets that can be competing against the big powerhouse, because there will be, let's say, cooperative across different technologies, European technologies, and to provide other type of standards for SMEs and industry to rely on. For instance, if an industry at this stage is using a Google model for an application, and suddenly Google says, oh, this model is open source, but I will update it, I will change it, because I want to improve it. Suddenly, you have developed an application with this model which is open source, and the application is no longer working because Google has decided that it's going to change the model. And so the big issue is that, yes, today the de facto standards are foreign standards. So the idea of this project is to collect all type of resources across Europe and provide European standards to industry that will be compliant with the AI Act. So it's not an easy task, and the specific feature of this European project is that the goal of this project is to release a platform which will be supported by a commercial entity. So the goal of this European project is to, let's say, to be able to build up a commercial entity that will run the platform and provide commercial tools to the open ecosystem, commercial tools that will be AI compliant, that will come with no legacies, and that will make it possible for small technology provider to unite in a European ecosystems and provide something which is collaborative and interoperable to challenge the big de facto standards by the US or Chinese companies. So here we have, let's say, 28 partners from 13 countries. So they are depicted in here. And the goal is, of course, first, to be respectful of the European values and the European regulation, and also to promote innovation, to promote co-innovation, because in the European ecosystem, there is no big powerhouse able to, let's say, provide the de facto standards to the European economy. And so the goal here is to stimulate a collaborative, let's say, ecosystem where all the technology providers, small, medium, large, within Europe, collaborate to build up compliance standards for the European industry. And so the target, of course, is individual sector and also public sector, so that at the end of the day, you can buy European assets that are going to be interoperable, but that are going to, let's say, avoid any legacy to technologies that are not sovereign. And so the added value chain is to provide first tools to build models, to train them on the EuroHPC, on the supercomputers of Europe, and also to operate them in a trustworthy environment and provide a marketplace where an industry can pick up all the bricks of the technology stack from sovereign European technology. So this is quite an ambitious goal. And here the fact is that the aim of this project is to build up a commercial platform, a commercial entity. So this is an example of a collaboration that was weighed by Philippe this morning to try to counteract all the biases that, of course, are, let's say, disseminated by foreign technologies.
So when you say commercial, who would run it? Who would be the...
So the good question. Good question. One of the big issues is that this project has been funded by public fund. So the big issue is that we need to build up a commercial entity, avoiding any, let's say, issues regarding competitive bias. And so the nature of this commercial entity is still to be determined, but all the process is supervised by the European Committee to make sure that once the platform, the commercial entity has been created with part of public funds, part of private funds, it's not going to distort competition. So this is part of the overall thinking. But definitely, we are, the project is at the moment considering the different options to build up this commercial entity while all the process has been funded by public funding.
And so there will be one entity for whole Europe?
Yes, this platform will be the one-stop shopping for all Europe. And one of the first assets it's going to provide is that, as I mentioned, there are kind of 20 supercomputers around in Europe. And so this platform is going to be the front end, the commercial front end for the AI factory, the European AI factories. It will be the first, application. And of course, this front end, you will be able to candidate for computing resources, but also for all type of technical stack you need to develop your own business. And so the goal also is there are two goals. First, to accelerate AI adoption across Europe, and to make sure that this technology is going to be developed as a sovereign asset and not as a dependency to foreign technology. Some facts that, let's say, support this initiative. In terms of research, you have 1.5 billion grants today, let's say, delivered by the European Research Council. You have 50,000 AI researchers in Europe. You have more than 120 AI research centers and labs. You will have 28, so not 20, but 19 AI factories by 2026. And you have 22,000 AI patent applications. So European is not a dwarf in AI, but it's trailing behind because so far it's not enough collaborative, and there is no big player that can be, let's say, a competitor to the US and Chinese players. In terms of industries, the market value of, for the AI sectors is around 100 billion euros with 30% annual growth. You have 13 billion investment in European AI. You have more than 6,300 startups in AI in Europe and 2,002 unicorns. So we are still a player in AI, but only 26 of the European adult workforce work with AI at work at the moment. You have 8 billion AI venture in Europe compared to 100 in the US. Europe captures only 7% of the global AI investment, while US and China, account for 80% of AI investment at the moment. And so you can read all the other figures. So clearly, we are not leading the AI revolution at this time in Europe. And so the goal of Deploy AI is to unify this ecosystem in Europe, and this platform will have the goal to provide, let's say, European standards for the European industries in terms of AI software stack. And the goal here is, the keyword is collaborative, meaning the current research is, let's say, scattered across Europe, which is good because, let's say, it's good for innovation that you have such diversity. But if you want to scale up, you need to have a more collaborative mindset, so that we gather strengths in Europe to be able to scale up, to be competitive with the US, let's say, players. And when I speak about a fragmented ecosystem, you have plenty of European initiatives, but like in all domains, they are a little bit, scattered across different type of projects. You have the TEFs, which are technological experimental facilities. You have the HPC provider. You have plenty of let's say, stakeholders that are not very well connected together. And so the goal of this platform is to connect all European initiatives so that it can scale up to be competitive. And of course, the value proposition is a one-stop shopping, but the keyword is trustworthy. Trustworthy because this technology, as it was explained in the morning, is full of bias by design. This technology is full of bias because it relies on massive amount of data, and those massive amount of data, they are by nature representative of a dominant culture, which is by definition the English culture, the English language. And so this bias is not only a language bias, it's also let's say an economical and a civilized, it's a bias about societal values. And of course, if we want to keep the European identity, we need to have a trustworthy entry point, meaning an entry point where the technology that has been developed, let's say, is aware and tries to avoid all the biases that this technology contains by design. And so this platform will contain tools for developers, a marketplace to, let's say, aggregate all the type of softwares and applications that are European built, and business navigators that will help people find the right solution for their problem. So unified ecosystem, European sovereignty, democratized access to AI resources, and freedom to innovate because open standards and not no legacy from proprietary technology. And of course, this is a big challenge. So any question about this Deploy AI project, this AI on Demand project, which is, as you understand, quite ambitious? Any remark?
This sounds like you are in the process of doing this. How long is this going, and are there any concrete results at the moment? What's the time frame?
Okay, sorry, because your voice was coming from very far away, so I'm not sure, but so the time frame, first the time frame. The time frame is, so the project started 2 years ago, the time frame is 4 years, but the commercial entity is going to be created by the end of this year, first. Yeah.
You showed how in the US or in maybe just North America in general, in China possibly, these systems, governmental systems are already pretty well integrated as well. Is there any, do you happen to know if there's any European action on implementing AI in schools as well? Because this could solve that issue with people engaging in more.
Part of the you're right. Part of this project includes initiatives to create a training ecosystem also. But of course, the big asset of US and China, the big asset is everything is let's say controlled by the government. In the US, there are big powerhouses that by definition create standards that are purely American oriented. So it's not even the government, it's the private, it's the Googles, the Facebook, Meta, and so on that create de facto standards. And Microsoft, of course, that creates standards which when you use, for instance, when you use the Azure platform by Microsoft to develop your AI application, you are locked in to a private technology and you are fully dependent on Microsoft. Which means that, for instance, you are, whenever there will be some, let's say, there will be some issues with connected to the security of the United States, you know, those type of application will be, let's say, accessible to the US government for any type of control. You mean that this, when you use this technology, you create legacies, dependencies, on US governments because by legal constraints, all American softwares, if ever there are some, let's say, suspicion that it's connected with a defense issue, all your data can be, let's say, can be handed over to the US government for control. So it's highly critical. And now, in the first years of the boom of the generative AI, no industry were aware of this legacy. But nowadays, more and more industries are aware of the legacy of these technological dependencies. And so this type of initiative is strongly supported at this time by European industry, by the European industry. Provided the end result is competitive, of course. Because the challenge is we need to have a European ecosystem, but it needs to be competitive against other type of assets. I'm not sure I've perfectly answered to your point.
Yeah, I meant implementing this development in schools.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, part of the goal is to serve public organization. And so public organization means research universities, but probably schools. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Because, you know, the target of this platform is not only to provide tools and assets for industries, it's to provide tools and assets for the public sector. And within this public sector, you have education, of course.
Yeah, like a public necessity.
Yeah.
It's corresponding to Europeans themselves, so that they're not led to using other systems that, as you said, could lead to security issues in the long run.
Exactly. Yeah. This is the goal. Public sector industries, because we need to progressively get rid of any technical dependencies on US governments or US economics. Because, by the way, when you use US models or US tools, you pay a high level of fees. And the goal of this platform is also to provide tools and assets that are going to be, let's say, competitive in terms of cost. Because when you provide a de facto standard, you can increase your fees. The client is trapped. And so Microsoft, on any type of Microsoft product, you pay high fees to Microsoft because you cannot find another competing product. And this is what we want to avoid with this project, to provide open source technology that will be as efficient as US or Chinese technology, but free from either technological or economical dependencies. Definitely. Yeah.
What the role plays here the availability of the hardware? Because now there are all these. What the role plays in this project, the availability of the hardware? Because the problem is that there are all these big companies fighting for the last GPUs, for the last RAM, and so on. So is Europe able to get enough of GPUs, enough of high-performance devices?
Yeah, that might be a bottleneck. At this stage, Europe, for instance, the European supercomputers, they have no issues in buying GPUs. But clearly, this is also dependencies. But in this regard, just take the example of the Chinese models. There was a ban to sell high-tech GPUs to Chinese recently. This didn't prevent the Chinese model to be more, let's say, to overcome this limitation and deliver, very competitive models against US ones. Why so? Because since they didn't have access to the highest competitive compute, they were, they were driven to be more innovative, more inventive. And that's probably the way out of this bottleneck. Because today, this technology relies too much on increasing the power of compute, increasing the number of data, increasing the number of training runs, increasing. So the technology today is betting on, let's say, on leveraging on volume of compute, volume of data. And probably this is not the right path to innovation in this technology. Probably this is a dead end. And doing some research in those algorithms, I can tell you that if you rely on improving the model through larger volume of data, better compute, it's a dead end. In order to be innovative, you need not to rely only or to rely essentially on improving the compute that you are using or improving the volume of data. You need to think otherwise, to think out of the box. And that's why the Chinese succeeded in, beating the OpenAI models with their last release of Qwen models or so on. Because they needed to, since they didn't have access to the same level of compute, they needed to think out of the box. And innovation comes when you think out of the box. When you have a very clear track for innovation, which is more compute, more data, it's not innovation. It's mechanical improvement through compute, through volume, through data. But it's not true innovation. Because this technology, you know, it's very young. It's progressing every month, but it's very young. So we are probably very far away from what is the best technology to use the language, to use deep learning in language. And so if you rely only on compute, probably you will go into the wrong direction. That's my 2 cents.
You mentioned the Chinese that were forced to innovate, forced to optimize. Is this also part of this project, or are we just relying on the Chinese to get better?
Oh, by definition, by definition, you know, because the strategy of the European, AI development is to build up on collaborative practices. So in the US and in the Chinese, the strategy is to bet on big players. Because when you bet on big players, you can maximize the amount of funding you can have for one player. Here in Europe, the strategy is the opposite. You know, you bet on a collaborative system, like the open source system, where you have many players that may not have each one big funding resources, but that can collaborate with a diversity of thoughts. And probably this is the best strategy in the long run to be very competitive in AI. Because you will probably see OpenAI now probably maybe on a dead end, because always focusing on the same track, you know, leveraging on the higher and higher volume of funding, higher and higher volume of data, higher and higher volume of compute, probably may not be the good strategy. And I can remind you the failure of Google. Google invented the transformers, but they were unable to discover how to use them to do proper innovation. Because by definition, the big, you know, those big players, and it's due to sociology of the organization. Those big players, you know, the bigger you are, the less agile you are whenever it comes to disruptive innovation. And so, of course, OpenAI did a disruptive innovation with transformers. They didn't invent by themselves, by the way. But the bigger you grow, maybe it's not a good strategy to be innovative, especially in a domain where innovation, you know, is very much open. You know, there are plenty of ideas to innovate in this technology, plenty of ways to innovate. And probably, if you bet only on size, in the long run, it might not be the good strategy to have the good innovation.
But is it part of this project to do such? To have? Is there a fund for research and innovation in this field?
No, it's not part of the project. The project provides the ecosystem, not the funding. It provides the opportunities to collaborate. But the funding will be, you know, there will be other type of European projects to fund initiatives in different domains. Here, this project, this platform is aimed to provide the structure of collaborative, stimulation, but not the funding. It's going to create the network, the better networking, a better collaborative approach, so that each brick in the software stack that is needed to develop the technologies can be compatible with each other within a given ecosystem.
So the partners in the network will do the innovation, and then the presentation will be this project.
Sorry.
The partners of the project, they are doing the innovation, and then whatever is finished, the finished product will be visible on this platform.
No, the partner of the projects just provide the platform, meaning the collaborative structure. They may be part of the innovation by themselves, so we do innovate in some areas of AI, but the aim of this project is to provide the structure, the ecosystem for others to innovate, not necessarily the members of the consortium. So the last project is LLM for use. So this project is the applicative, let's say, side of the OeAW project. And so it's meant to develop application by domain that will rely on the European models. So the domain of application are science, public services, tourism, telecommunication, and energy. And so what we are doing in this project is that we are trying to, let's say, to develop tools to fine-tune models. And one of the assets of this project will be a fine-tuning API that everybody can use to fine-tune open source model to build up application. And of course, again, respectful of the European regulation, and with already some key application in the five sectors I have been talking about: science, public services, tourism, telecommunication, and energy. Energy, for instance, one of the use cases will be to try and improve the automation of system engineering, for instance, using generative AI. And science, one of the applications is to be able to, let's say, to create automated, semi-automated report on a given research topic, to be able to scroll all public, let's say, all publication in a given domain, and be able to, let's say, to report on the state of the art in a given research domain, leveraging on publication available in different databases. And this project is coordinated by the Alliance for Language Technology, ALTEDIC, which has, let's say, implementation across Europe, in each country, not all countries of European at the moment, but the aim is to have this kind of organization in each country, focusing on collecting data, let's say, respectful of the identity of the national languages and national culture. And this consortium, you know, has 70 members, which is quite huge, and a kind of a burden to work properly. A few words about LightOn, very quick because the time is running out. So LightOn, at the moment, we are world-class in one specific type of model, which are what we call the retrieval model. Retrieval model are, they are called also encoders. They are models that will take, let's say, data and will transform them into mathematical vectors. So this type of technology is hidden within generative technology, but one of the goals of AI, one of the challenge is that generative AI hallucinate a lot, meaning they invent a lot. When you ask a question to a model, from time to time the model is hallucinating. Why? Because the model has no real contact with reality. The model has been trained with data, so his memory contains a lot of data, but those data are disconnected with reality. And so there is a specific technology which is called RAG. Probably everybody knows about RAG. It's retrieval augmented generation. So the RAG technology, you use documents and you ask a model to answer a question, but using a set of documents that, let's say, is representative of the ground truth of reality. And this type of process, which is called RAG, is allow the model to connect to the reality, because you provide the model data that are faithful to reality, and then you ask the model to use the data to release the answer. And so this technology, you know, is based on improving the way models connect to real data. And so a few challenges, of course, of this technology. Sovereignty. Nowadays, the investments are so heavy that by definition, it's so capital intensive that by definition, today the big players are private players, because they rely on private capital and private investment, and public funding is not at the same scale of private funding. And so we have a big issue of sovereignty by definition. Sustainability, what everybody, let's say, overlook is that this technology is very expensive. The volume of data and the volume of computer to manufacture a model and to use a model is huge. And so the data centers that host the model are very expensive in terms of energy consumption. So a lot of advertising is made on the outcome of this technology, on the capacity of the technology to surpass human intelligence. But what is not outlined is that the cost of these capabilities are huge in terms of energy. And in the next future, probably the energy consumption of the data centers will be one of the key issues of the sustainability of this technology. And that is, again, the reason why the bottleneck of compute is not a real bottleneck, because if the research goes on this path of using more and more compute, it's not going to be sustainable. You need to have models that are small enough to be efficient, but small enough also to be usable by industry and not destroy the planet. At this time, I repeat, when you use OpenAI or any kind of let's say, provider, the price you pay is not representative of the cost. There is a dumping process, there is an AI bubble, because part of the cost, a huge part of the cost is hidden at the moment. Trustworthiness, of course, those models, are based on bias, as explained this morning. And so, because those models, once trained, are very heavily dependent on the data they have been training on. And so, this is a major, let's say, challenge for this technology, because those data do contain a lot of bias. And so, to what extent we can have a technology that is trustworthy, while those models heavily depend on data, we don't know. Because even if those models are open source, meaning that they publish their weights, they don't publish the type of data they have been training on. So they don't, publish, they are not transparent on the type of data they have been using to train their models. So you don't know the bias that have been included into those models by construction, by definition. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, feel free.